Let me tell you something right now. What they thought would be her end, what they hoped would crush her, what they expected to see scattered in pieces on the ground, God used it as the very place where her oil started flowing. They walked away thinking she would weep herself into nothingness. They stepped back thinking she would crumble without their applause. But what they didn't realize, what they never counted on, is that solitude doesn't destroy a woman of purpose. It awakens her. When you don't understand the assignment on someone's life, you'll misjudge the silence. You'll misread the stillness. You'll think the breaking is a burial, but baby, it's a birthing. What they saw as loneliness, heaven saw as consecration. What they called abandonment, God called alignment. What they called alignment, God called alignment. Because in the wilderness, she didn't wither, she woke up. In the desert, she didn't dry out, she dug deep. In the silence, she didn't go crazy. She heard the voice of the one who made her untouchable. So if you've ever been left behind, ever been underestimated, ever been isolated, I came to tell you, solitude was never your sentence, it was your sanctuary. And by the time this is over, you're going to see that what looked like breaking was really becoming. Let's talk about it. They looked at her and thought, she won't last without us. They walked away with certainty in their eyes and smugness in their steps, believing that their absence would crumble her foundation. They whispered behind closed doors, she'll be back. She can't make it on her own. But what they didn't realize was this: isolation is not a curse, it's a classroom. And the woman they tried to break wasn't being buried, she was being planted. There's something about being left alone that reveals who you really are. When the applause stops, when the phone doesn't ring, when no one checks in, that's when your soul starts to speak. That's when the noise of the world fades and the lessons of life begin. You see, solitude doesn't destroy you, it delivers you. It strips away the distractions and exposes the depths. In the silence, she didn't find despair. She found direction. She was never meant to bloom in the shade of their validation. She had to be cut off to be called up. She had to be alone to finally hear the voice that matters most. Because let's be honest, some lessons can only be learned when it's just you and the weight of your own breath. When it's just you and the echo of your own questions. That's the moment the truth starts rising like fire in your bones. That's when purpose gets loud. While they assumed she was sitting in pity, she was sitting in power. Every tear she cried was watering the roots of the woman she was becoming. Every night she wrestled alone became a night she grew stronger. No one saw her in the stillness. No one heard her when she cried out. No one noticed when she got back up. But she didn't need to be seen to be strengthened. She didn't need a crowd to find her crown. Because isolation is not a punishment, it's preparation. When you're forced into solitude, you either break or you build. She chose to build. She chose to lean into the silence and find meaning in the middle of it. She chose to stop chasing after people who only valued her when she was useful. She let the loneliness purify her. She let it teach her that she didn't need to be surrounded to be strong. They thought the silence would scare her, but it was in the silence that she found a new sound, her own voice. For the first time, she heard her own heart without distortion. She began to remember who she was before they told her who to be. She began to rewrite the narrative that others tried to write for her. She realized that her worth was never in their presence. It was always in her essence. The classroom of isolation taught her that peace is not the absence of problems, it's the presence of perspective. She didn't need more noise, she needed more stillness. She didn't need more people, she needed more purpose. And now, after being in the fire alone, she came out refined, better, clearer, unshakable. What they thought would destroy her ended up developing her. What they thought would weaken her ended up waking her in her perspective. What they thought would destroy her ended up waking her. And so, when they thought would destroy her, ended up waking her. And oh, how foolish they were to think she'd break just because she was by herself. They didn't know that some storms don't come to shake you, they come to shape you. And while they ran from solitude, she embraced it. While they filled their lives with distractions, she faced herself. She did the hard work. She went into the depths. She tore down walls. She confronted wounds. And she came back with wisdom they couldn't touch. See, there are some transformations that require separation. There are some seasons where God will isolate you, not to punish you, but to prepare you. He will remove the familiar, the comfortable, even the loyal, so that all that remains is the authentic. And in that place, you don't just heal, you evolve. She became fluent in silence. She learned the language of her own soul. And that's why she's dangerous now. Because she no longer fears being alone. And that's why the hardest thing that God conferred on us has become the link, so that all that remains is the authentic. And in that place, she becomes fluent in silence. She learned the language of her own soul. They can't use abandonment as a weapon anymore. She's not desperate for their company. She's not waiting for them to come back. Because in her solitude, she found everything she was searching for in them. She walked through that valley and discovered that she was never really alone. She discovered that when everyone left, something greater entered. A peace that didn't make sense. A strength that didn't need to shout. A confidence that wasn't based on attention, but on alignment. So now, when people try to shake her, they fail. When they try to pull her back into the old version of herself, she doesn't flinch. Because she's been alone with her pain and her promise. She's wrestled in the dark and walked out with a new name. She stood in the fire and refused to bow. And you can't intimidate someone who's already survived the storm. They thought she'd break alone. But solitude didn't break her. It built her. It revealed her. It raised her. And now she walks with a quiet kind of power. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything. The kind that doesn't beg to be seen. The kind that no longer needs to be understood because she finally understands herself. So let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them replay their assumptions, because the woman they thought they knew, she's gone. In her place stands someone they can't reach anymore, someone who no longer dances for their approval, someone who no longer waits for their validation, someone who has mastered the silence, embraced the solitude, and risen untouched. She is not broken. She is untouchable. When people walked away, they thought they were leaving her empty. They thought their absence would echo so loudly in her life that she'd crumble under the weight of loneliness. They thought their exit would erase her confidence, suffocate her light, and shake her sense of worth. They thought they were the ones holding her up. But what they didn't realize was this: when people leave, God enters. See, sometimes it takes a departure for the divine to show up. Sometimes it's in the absence of others that the presence of something greater finally makes itself known. People will abandon you thinking they're making a point, thinking they're proving their power, but they're only making space for your true source to step in. The truth is, she didn't lose anything when they left. She gained access to something they were standing in front of. God will let people exit your life, not to punish you, but to prepare you, because not everyone who's in your circle is meant to be in your story forever. Some people are distractions wrapped in loyalty. Some are placeholders that keep you from stepping into your true purpose. And when the time comes, He'll pull them out, not to hurt you, but to heal you, not to diminish you, but to develop you. They thought they were walking away from her, but in reality, they were being removed. Sometimes rejection is not rejection at all, it's redirection. It's God shutting the door so He can open one that no man can close. It's Him tearing down the false support so He can become the only support. Because the most powerful version of her couldn't emerge until she was no longer leaning on them. She thought she needed them. She thought their approval validated her path. She thought their voices confirmed her value. But in their silence, she heard the whisper of something far deeper. She heard a voice that didn't change with seasons or shift with opinions. A voice that reminded her who she was when everyone else tried to redefine her. And that voice wasn't theirs. That voice was sacred. People may leave, but purpose doesn't. This voice says, someday I won't need them. The voice says, people may leave, but purpose doesn't. The voice says, people may leave, but purpose doesn't. The voice doesn't say, person, get off your bike and sit, but die. The voice, people may walk away, but power remains. And when she was stripped of the crowd, the connection, the constant company, what she discovered was that she was never alone to begin with. She just couldn't see it when others were in the way. Sometimes, the only way to see the light is to be left in the dark. When she was alone, she found a presence that never left. A peace that didn't depend on circumstance or feeling up to some. A love that didn't come with conditions. While people showed up when it was easy and convenient, God showed up when it was quiet and painful. While others celebrated her surface, He healed her soul. While they applauded her strength, He addressed her wounds. And when they disappeared, He stepped in closer. She didn't need another relationship. She needed restoration. She didn't need more attention. She needed restoration. And she needed service and restoration. The value of self cannot be priced on a premium service. He needed a restoration, and she needed service. He needed a restoration, and she needed service. He made a promise and made it fit. Did she cry? She needed alignment, and what looked like abandonment turned into an encounter, a divine collision between her brokenness and her breakthrough, a moment where her desperation met her destiny. You have to understand, there are some doors that only open when you're alone. Some healing that only happens when there's no one else to distract you. Some strength that only rises when you're on your knees with no one around to pull you up. They thought she'd fall without them, but she rose higher because of it. They thought their leaving would break her spirit, but their absence became the reason she discovered a deeper source of strength. They were her crutches. She leaned on them because it felt safe, familiar, predictable. But she didn't realize they were limiting her until they were gone. And when they left, she wobbled at first. She cried. She asked questions. She even doubted herself. But then, something clicked. Something opened. Something stirred. And from within that broken moment, she realized she had wings. Sometimes people leave so you can learn how to stand without them. Sometimes they're removed so you stop relying on what was never supposed to carry you. They thought they were punishing her, but all they did was release her. All they did was give her the opportunity to tap in to what had been buried under their influence all along. When people leave, God enters with intention. He doesn't come empty-handed. He brings clarity. He brings correction. He brings peace. Yes, but he also brings pressure. The kind of pressure that reshapes your priorities. The kind of pressure that purifies your motives. The kind that stretches your faith beyond what you thought you could handle. But that pressure never comes to destroy, it comes to define. And now she's different. Not because people love her again, not because they came back, but because she doesn't need them to. She's no longer trying to fill the space they once occupied. She's learned to live full from within. Her security doesn't hang on their return. Her peace isn't threatened by their silence. She knows who truly showed up when everyone else faded. And that's the relationship she protects now. See, people are unpredictable. One day they're singing your praises, the next they're gone without explanation. That's why you can't anchor your identity in them. That's why your worth can't be tied to their presence. Because when the wind blows, and it will, it's not the crowd that holds you. It's the foundation. It's the relationship that was there before the success, before the heartbreak, before the opinions. It's the relationship you found when you were left with nothing but your tears and your faith. That kind of connection doesn't fade. It doesn't shift with mood swings or distance itself when things get tough. It stays. It speaks truth. It gives life. And that's what she clings to now. Not the memories of who left, but the revelation of who remained. They thought they were the reason she shined. They thought they were the power behind her smile. But the truth is, her glow didn't come from them. It came from within. And the light she carries now, it's not for their validation. It's not for applause. It's for purpose. It's for impact. It's the light that came from the one who stepped in when everyone else walked out. She doesn't resent those who left. She blesses them. Because if they hadn't gone, she wouldn't have grown. If they hadn't disappeared, she wouldn't have discovered. If they hadn't walked away, she never would have walked into the life that was waiting for her. Now she walks with boldness. Now she moves with certainty. Now she stands in rooms that used to intimidate her. Because when the worst happened, when they all left, she found the best thing. And no matter who comes or goes from this point forward, one thing is certain. She'll never again mistake their presence for her power. She knows now, when people leave, God enters. And that changed everything. It seems to me that this is everything. She didn't ask for the wilderness. She didn't choose the silence. She didn't wake up one day and say, "Take everything familiar away from me." But the wilderness came anyway. People she trusted walked out. The ones who promised to stand by her disappeared when she needed them most. Doors closed without warning. Life stripped her of her comfort zones. And there she stood, alone, exposed, unprepared, confused, surrounded by silence and carrying the weight of disappointment. But what looked like abandonment was actually an assignment. What felt like a curse was actually a calling. Because the wilderness doesn't come to destroy, it comes to build. There's something sacred about being thrown into a place where nothing makes sense, where your usual support is gone, where the calls stop, the compliments dry up, and the applause dry up. There are some things sacred about being thrown into a place where nothing makes sense, where the calls are kind, where the calls are fades. But it's in that barren space that your spirit is stretched. In the wilderness, you're not pampered, you're pressed, you're pushed, you're challenged in ways you never imagined. And in that pressure, the real you begins to rise. She didn't break down in the wilderness, she broke open. The tears she cried in the silence didn't weaken her. They watered something deeper. A new version of her was being formed, one painful moment at a time. She stopped looking for escape routes and started digging in. She stopped begging for comfort and started asking for clarity. Because there comes a moment in the wilderness when you realize you can't go back to what broke you, and you're not yet where you want to be, but you can't stand still either. You've got to grow in the in-between. The wilderness forced her to learn how to fight, not with her fists. So often in life, we fight with words. So often in life, we fight with words. But you can't stand still either. You've got to grow in the in-between. The wilderness forced her to learn how to fight, not just skate, but fight with wisdom, not with her words, but with her faith, with her will, with her resilience. It forced her to stand up when everything inside her wanted to lay down. It taught her how to build when she had no blueprint, how to lead herself when there was no one left to follow. And through that battle, she became someone unstoppable. The people who left her there, thinking she'd fall apart, they didn't know what the wilderness would do to her. They didn't understand that isolation was the exact environment where her greatness would begin to take shape. They didn't see that taking the crowd away would give her the space to listen, to really hear her own voice for the first time in a long time. In the wilderness, there are no masks to wear, no expectations to perform for, no distractions to numb the pain. Just raw truth. And in that rawness, she found power. She learned how to walk without applause. She learned how to speak without needing approval. She learned how to cry without shame. And somewhere in the process, she stopped being afraid of her own strength. She stopped apologizing for how deeply she felt. She stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. She started embracing the fire inside of her. Because the wilderness wasn't just revealing her weaknesses, it was awakening her weapon. Each setback became a lesson. Each lonely night became a turning point. Each unanswered prayer became a doorway into something better than she asked for. She realized she didn't have to understand everything to trust the process. She didn't need all the answers to take the next step. All she needed was to stop running from the discomfort and start moving through it. And as she kept walking, something strange happened. What once felt like punishment began to feel like purpose. She no longer saw the wilderness as a place of lack. She began to see it as a place of refinement, a holy ground where the noise of the world couldn't reach her, where shallow relationships fell away, where the deepest parts of her soul could finally breathe. She didn't just survive the wilderness. She became one with it. She stopped fighting the silence and let it speak to her. She stopped praying for quick exits and started seeking lasting transformation. The wilderness built a warrior out of her, one that doesn't flinch when things get hard, one that doesn't crumble when people leave, one that doesn't look for a savior in human skin. She carries her own fire now. She's no longer driven by desperation, but by destiny. She's no longer trying to escape hard seasons. She's walking through them with purpose, because she knows what's on the other side is not just survival, it's sovereignty, it's power, it's peace. And here's what they never saw coming. The version of her that emerged from the wilderness can't be manipulated, can't be controlled, can't be broken by the same things that used to shake her. She's tasted solitude and found strength in it. She's walked through the valley and discovered treasures they didn't even know existed. The wilderness didn't make her bitter, it made her bold. It didn't leave her wounded, it left her wise. So when you see her now, unbothered, unshaken, untouchable, understand that it wasn't handed to her. It was earned. It was fought for. Every scar has a story. Every silent night, a prayer behind it. Every step forward, a decision not to quit. She was trained in the dark, raised in obscurity, shaped in seasons no one saw. And that's what makes her dangerous. That's what makes her walk different. She doesn't need approval to move. She doesn't need a crowd to feel valuable, because she knows who she is. She knows what she came through, and she knows what the wilderness taught her. She's not who she used to be. She doesn't beg, she doesn't chase, she doesn't shrink. She stands, she commands, she carries presence. The woman they thought they abandoned is gone. The woman who came out of the wilderness, she's a force. And she's not looking back. Because the wilderness didn't just toughen her up, it transformed her. Now, when storms come, she doesn't run. When the road gets lonely, she doesn't panic. She's learned that growth isn't always pretty, but it's always worth it. She's learned that solitude is not the absence of people, it's the presence of preparation. And she walks forward with her head high, not because life got easier, but because she got stronger. They thought she'd break alone, but they didn't understand. Solitude doesn't break real women. It builds them. In the wilderness, it built her into someone they'll never be able to touch again. There was a time when the silence felt unbearable. The stillness pressed in like a weight on her chest. The days moved slowly, and the nights echoed with thoughts she tried to escape. When everything around her went quiet, she thought it was a sign that something was wrong. But over time, she discovered the truth. Her healing was hidden in the silence. No one told her that solitude could be sacred, No one warned her that the loudest breakthroughs come in the quietest places. People around her were always moving, always talking, always distracting themselves with noise, but she didn't have that luxury anymore. Life stripped the distractions away, pulled back the curtains, and sat her down in a room with nothing but her own heart. And at first, that room felt like a prison. But eventually, it became a sanctuary. Healing didn't begin with applause. It didn't begin with advice from others. It began in the dark corners of her own soul. Corners she had avoided for years. In the quiet, she couldn't hide from the pain anymore. She had to face it. She had to confront the memories that hurt, the regrets she buried, the wounds that never properly healed. And it was hard. It was exhausting, but it was necessary. She realized that healing is not always beautiful. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it means crying over things you thought you were past. Sometimes it means sitting with your own mistakes and forgiving yourself anyway. No audience, no validation, just the quiet process of rebuilding from the inside out. While everyone else was rushing to be seen, she was learning how to be still. While others were chasing noise, she was listening to her spirit. And what she heard in that silence changed her. She began to understand that not everything that breaks you is bad for you. Some things break you open so you can finally let go of what was never meant to stay. There were days she questioned if she'd ever feel whole again. Days when the silence was so loud, it scared her. But little by little, the silence became familiar, and eventually, it became comforting. She found that when you sit still long enough, the storm inside you begins to settle. And what's left after the storm passes is a deeper, quieter strength. Healing in silence taught her how to love herself without conditions. There was no one there telling her she was enough. She had to decide that for herself. There was no one clapping for her progress. She had to celebrate her own growth. There was no one filling the space with encouragement. She had to become her own encourager. She had to become her own encourager. And through that, she built a foundation that no one could shake. She learned how to be kind to herself, how to stop criticizing her reflection, how to release the guilt she'd carried for years, how to accept the parts of her story that she used to hide in shame. The silence gave her the space to rewrite the narrative, to stop seeing herself as broken and start recognizing the beauty in her scars. There's a kind of healing that doesn't need an audience, the kind that happens when no one is watching, when you stop performing, when you let the tears fall without explanation, when you whisper prayers you never say out loud. That's the healing that transforms you. That's the healing that doesn't wear off when the applause ends or the people disappear. She realized she didn't need to explain her pain to anyone. She didn't need others to validate her healing. She knew what she had been through. She knew how many times she'd fallen and gotten back up. And that was enough. That was more than enough. The silence gave her back her power. The solitude reminded her that healing is not about proving anything. It's about being whole. Quietly, completely, deeply. Her healing wasn't loud. It didn't come with a dramatic moment or a grand revelation. It came in the ordinary, in the deep breaths, in the journaling, in the prayers, in the forgiveness she offered herself each morning. It came in the way she stopped rushing and started resting, in the way she stopped escaping and started engaging with her own soul her own truth. And when she emerged from that season, she didn't come out shouting. She came out steady, grounded, centered. People didn't notice a sudden change. She saw a quiet confidence that wasn't there before. They couldn't put their finger on it, but something about her was different. And that difference came from the work she did in silence. She no longer craved the noise. She no longer feared the quiet. She understood now that silence is not the enemy. It's a tool, a teacher, a healer. It's where you go when the world tries to drown you out. It's where you go when the world tries to drown you out. It's where you find yourself when you feel like you've lost everything. It's where your soul goes to breathe again. People used to say she was too quiet, too distant. But what they didn't see was the fire being reignited in the silence. What they didn't hear was the strength being formed behind the stillness. She was doing the work no one talks about, the kind of work that doesn't get posted on social media, the kind of work that doesn't get rewarded right away. But it lasts. It builds something real. Now she carries her healing like armor, not to hide behind, but to stand in. She knows her worth now, not because someone told her, but because she decided it. She walks with grace, not because life didn't hurt her, but because she let it teach her. She's not easily shaken. She's not quickly offended. She's not desperate for attention, because she's been to the bottom and she climbed her way out in silence. The woman they thought was breaking, she was actually rebuilding. Not loudly, not publicly, but deeply. She went through the kind of healing that only happens when you stop running from yourself. And now she's unshakable, untouchable. Not because life got easier, but because she got wiser, stronger, softer in the right places, and tougher in the places that matter. Her healing was hidden in the silence, and she will never fear the quiet again. Because it was in the quiet that she found the version of herself they could never break. My job is to make known my vision so that others may see. My job is to make known my vision so that others may see. This is the vision. My vision, so that others may see. She heard many times the voice of wisdom. She heard many times the voice of God resting on all. They thought they knew her. They thought they understood her limits. They watched her walk through the fire, expecting her to be reduced to ashes. They stood on the sidelines, waiting for the cracks to spread, waiting for the moment she would finally fall apart. But what they didn't realize is that she didn't just make it through, she mastered it. She didn't just survive the storm, she became the storm. She became the storm. She became the storm. They thought the wilderness would leave her weak, but it birthed a woman they would never be able to touch again. When she was left alone, they assumed she would spend her days mourning what she lost. They assumed she would spend her nights aching for what slipped through her fingers. But what they didn't account for was what was being built in the background. They didn't account for what was quietly growing in her when no one else was looking. The time she spent in solitude didn't make her fragile, it made her fierce. The space she had without them didn't make her empty, it made her whole. She didn't just survive, she transformed. Every painful moment taught her something they couldn't take away. Every tear she cried watered the roots of her next season. She didn't just get through it, she studied it. She studied the silence, the disappointments, the loneliness, and when she came out, she didn't come out broken. She came out with wisdom. She came out with clarity. She came out knowing exactly who she is and what she carries. There's a difference between someone who escapes the fire and someone who learns to walk through it. She walked through it. She walked through it awake, fully aware, fully present. She didn't rush the process. She didn't numb the pain. She allowed herself to feel it all, to confront it all, to wrestle with every question, every ache, every fear. And in that process, she gained mastery over the very things that were sent to destroy her. Now, she doesn't need to argue to prove her strength. She doesn't need to raise her voice to demand respect. She doesn't need to explain herself to anyone. She's mastered the quiet power that speaks for itself. Her presence is enough. Her peace is enough. Her boundaries are enough. She's learned that sometimes the loudest statement you can make is, "You're calm." Sometimes the greatest revenge is to keep growing while they're still waiting for you to fall. She's untouchable now, not because she's unreachable, but because she no longer entertains what drains her. She no longer runs toward the people who walked away. She no longer pleads for the attention she once craved. She understands that she is the foundation now. She understands that what was built in her solitude can't be dismantled by fleeting opinions. She doesn't need to be invited anymore. She's learned to build her own table. She's learned to validate herself. She doesn't need their applause. She's learned to validate herself. She doesn't need their permission. She's learned that her purpose is not up for negotiation. She's not waiting for them to see her worth. She sees it. She knows it. She carries it with every step she takes. What was meant to break her became the soil where she planted new dreams. What was meant to silence her became the backdrop where her true voice grew louder. They thought she'd stop showing up. They thought she'd stop fighting. But she's still here. She's still rising. She's still pushing forward with a quiet, unstoppable determination that no one can measure from the outside. She mastered the art of release. She let go of the need to control outcomes. She let go of the weight of unfinished conversations. She let go of the urge to explain her growth to people committed to misunderstanding her. And in letting go, she found freedom. In releasing what she couldn't carry, she picked up what was always meant for her. She doesn't hold grudges. She doesn't keep score. That's not where her energy goes now. Her energy is invested in building, in becoming, in blossoming, into everything the wilderness prepared her to be. She understands now that peace is too expensive to trade for petty battles. She knows that alignment is more valuable than attention. They thought the season that isolated her would be the season that ended her. But it was the season that awakened her. It was the season that stripped away the superficial and forced her to meet the real version of herself. And the real version? She's not bitter. She's not chasing. She's not proving. She's standing. She's standing in the confidence of someone who has been to the bottom and found treasure there. She's standing in the wisdom of someone who knows what it costs to heal. She's standing in the grace of someone who has forgiven herself for the times she didn't know better. She's standing not as someone who was rescued, but as someone who rescued herself. The old version of her would have begged them to stay. The old version of her would have tried to explain the value she brought. But the woman who stands here now doesn't chase what leaves. She blesses what goes. She trusts what remains. She focuses on what's growing. Because she knows that the ones who walked away didn't take her worth with them. They only made room for her to step into her next level. And this new level, it's not about proving anything. It's not about being loud. It's about being solid, being rooted, being whole. She knows that storms may come again. People may disappoint her again. Life may stretch her again. But she's not afraid. She's been through enough to know that even in the hardest seasons, she's never alone. Even in the deepest valleys, she carries something that can't be taken from her. She didn't just make it through the solitude, she mastered it. She didn't just survive the silence, she owned it. She learned to thrive where others would have collapsed. She learned to build where others would have abandoned the ground. And now, she walks with the quiet certainty of someone who has nothing to prove but everything to live for. They can't reach her anymore. Not because she's hiding, but because she's risen to a place they can't access. A place of peace, of purpose, of power that was born in the very solitude they thought would destroy her. They didn't know that what they meant for harm would become the very thing that made her untouchable. But now they see it. Now they know. And now she knows it too. They thought she'd break alone. They thought solitude would shatter her spirit, silence her voice, and leave her begging for the pieces they took with them. They thought she'd beg and beg for the pieces they took with them. But they were wrong. So wrong. Because what they didn't know, what they never even considered, was that the silence would become her sanctuary. That the stillness would become her strategy. That the isolation would become the very ground where she remembered who she truly was before the world tried to tell her otherwise. She walked through fire without witnesses. She cried tears that nobody wiped away. She rebuilt herself from nothing but grit, grace, and God. She faced the nights where doubt screamed louder than hope, and she still got up. Day after day, step after step, alone, but never weak. She wasn't just surviving, she was strengthening. And now she's no longer the woman who needed their validation to breathe. She doesn't shrink to fit their comfort zones. She doesn't bend to win their approval. She doesn't chase after people who made her feel small. She honors her own growth. She protects her peace like treasure. She walks with a calm so fierce it unnerves those who underestimated her. She's untouchable, not because she hasn't been through the storm, but because she walked through it and claimed every lesson. She's untouchable because she no longer looks outside for what she's already found within. And the woman who once feared being alone, she now treasures it. Because solitude didn't steal anything from her, it gave her everything. So let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them sit in shock at the woman who rose from ruins and chose to rebuild in silence. They thought she'd break alone, but solitude made her untouchable.